Materials used in this presentation are period in nature and used for educational and entertainment purposes. Furthermore, videos have been used in conjunction with the photographs to produce continuity, in some instances are composites, and fall within the purview of the fair use doctrine of U.S. copyright laws. Attributions are given when required. Welcome to A Moment in Crime, a feature vignette presented by the True Crime Man's Dark Imagination YouTube channel. If you've enjoyed this presentation or any other presentation on this channel, please hit like, subscribe, and hit the bell in order to receive notifications on any further offerings on this channel.
The state of Kansas holds a myriad of violent incidents throughout its history. Prior to the American Civil War, pro- and anti-slavery factions battled in bloody conflicts to determine whether Kansas would enter the Union as a slave or free state. Once the argument settled, Kansas entered the Union as a free state. But with the internal conflicts resolved, once the war began, the state found itself in the middle of more battles, though not as famous and determinative. After the war concluded in 1865, Kansas became the destination for pioneering men and women who looked to stake claims on the land available and begin lives as farmers. Although most settled there, men used to violence and warfare sought to make a living in other pursuits such as robbery and murder. American highwaymen found Kansas to be a rich hunting ground. In this area, a local family became very infamous for their ability to rob, cheat, steal, and eventually murder. 5 spiritualist families arrived in Kansas, religious zealots who made their way in the area in hopes of converting non-believers in the area to Christianity. In 1870, one of these spiritualist families settled in Labette County near what would be later called Cherryvale. They were known as the Benders. John Sr., his wife Elmira, daughter Katie Bender, and son John Bender Jr. The elder Bender chose a 160-acre section of the western mounds located on a well-traveled trail known at the time as the Mission Independence Trail that extended from Independence to Fort Scott, Kansas. On this plot that Bender selected, the family built a one-room framed cabin with a barn, a corral, and they dug a well for water. The interior of the cabin was partitioned with a large canvas screen, which created a large barrier between the living quarters and the business side of the dwelling. There existed a small inn at the back of the cabin and a store in the front. The Benders touted that a customer could stay in a safe, overnight place to rest after a long journey, as well as get supplies to continue their trip such as gunpowder, shot, groceries, liquor, and tobacco. John Bender Sr. was an immigrant from Germany along with his wife, and despite being in America for a few years, he and his wife still possessed a guttural accent where people barely understood what they were saying in their broken English. At 60 years of age, Bender Sr. was a powerful man who stood over 6 feet tall, and with dark eyes set beneath a very dark brow, he gained the nickname from the locals of Old Beetle-Browed John. Elmira, Bender's wife, possessed the rough exterior of a woman, and locals branded her as the She-Devil. Mrs. Bender claimed to be a medium who could speak with the dead, often boiling herbs and roots used to what she claimed to cast spells and make charms. Unlike many families of the period, it was rumored that Mrs. Bender garnered far more fear from her husband than her son than anyone else. She ruled the home with an iron fist. John Bender Jr. has been described as tall, handsome, and able to speak English with a thick German accent. Bender Jr. laughed incessantly most of the time, to the point that most people who knew the family considered him a half-wit. Katie, the Bender's daughter, was considered by contemporaries to be very friendly, in fact friendlier than the rest of the family. She was quick to laugh and talk to strangers. She and John Jr. went to Sunday school regularly, and the community accepted them immediately. Katie believed herself to be somewhat of a medium and conducted seances at the cabin quite frequently. Because of this self-proclamation, Katie found herself in demand on the spiritualist circuit, earning modest amounts of money through this vocation. One interesting thing about Katie was that in her lectures, she advocated free love and murder. Katie desired, above all, fame and fortune. Because of the beliefs that she spouted in her lectures, locals began to believe that Katie was a bit on the satanic side. Beginning in 1871, several travelers who stopped at the Benders for a meal or a bed began to go missing. These traveling salesmen usually carried large sums of cash on them to purchase goods such as livestock, settling some land claims, or buying tracts of land along the trail. When the first few men went missing, the alarm had not been raised because, at this time, with slow communications, a few men reported missing did not raise any distressing news. But in 1873, the disappearances became more numerous, and the Osage Township, the principality where Cherryvale was located, started to hear vicious rumors regarding the disappearances, and further travelers bypassed the trail where the disappearances occurred. The Osage County Township called a special meeting to all persons around the Cherryvale area at the Harmony Grove Schoolhouse to see if anything could be done to find the missing men. John Sr. and John Jr. both attended that meeting. In order to locate the missing men, a physician from the area suggested that every farm and homestead be searched immediately. When the gathering asked for volunteers to conduct the searches, the Benders remained eerily silent. Subsequently, a neighbor of the Benders, Billy Toll, noticed that the Bender cabin and inn looked abandoned and the animals looked as though they had not been fed for some time. Toll went to the Osage Township and reported his findings, and Toll helped some of the concerned citizens launch a search of the Bender property. When the search party arrived at the Bender residence, they found the cabin empty of food, clothing, and personal possessions. The searchers also noticed a strong smell of decay permeate throughout the residence. The searchers also noticed a trap door in the eating area that appeared nailed shut. When the men pried the door open, they discovered a 6-foot hole filled with clotted blood that created an unbearable odor. Later, the men moved the entire cabin off its foundation to search for anything else underneath, but did not find any bodies. With all this blood, there had to be cadavers. Having not found any bodies under the cabin, the men dug near the cabin and noticed that in an area the Benders utilized as a vegetable garden, an area of some disturbed earth. Underneath this depression, they found the body of one of the more prominent missing men, Dr. William H. York. Dr. York sustained a crushed skull and his throat sliced from ear to ear. Over the course of the next few days, the digging around the property provided 9 other dead bodies, including a woman and a little girl. The brother of Dr. York, a lawyer and state senator, offered a $1,000 reward for information leading to Bender's arrest. The governor of Kansas, Thomas Osborne, offered another $2,000 reward for the apprehension of the bloody Benders. News of the murders spread quickly to the east and west coasts, and information about the true makeup of the Benders family came to light. Locals and others who heard of the murders gathered that the Benders were not what they seemed. In fact, the only Benders related were Almira and Katie, mother and daughter. What could be ascertained from the searches and the construction of the cabin, and where the bodies were later found on the property, is that once the travelers made their way to the Benders' cabin, the men would be seated at the table where a meal would be served. To distract the men, Katie appeared and applied her feminine wiles and stating she had psychic powers. While Katie drew the men's attention, Father John and her brother attacked the men from behind with a hammer blow to the skull, perhaps 2 blows. After rifling the pockets of the victims, Katie slit their throats and shoved them through the trap door. When darkness set in, the body would be buried on the property. The murders that drew attention to the family, of course, Dr. York, but also that of a father and daughter named Launcher. In the winter of 1872, Mr. Launcher and his daughter left Independence, headed for Iowa, then suddenly disappeared. Dr. York went in search for the Launchers and paid the search with his life. When a search party for Dr. York reached the Bender homestead, the Benders stated that they remembered Dr. York passing through, but then he left. There was no reason at the time for anyone to suspect the Benders of such heinous crimes as murder. Overall, diggers discovered 10 bodies buried in the Benders' apple orchard, including Dr. York, Mr. Launcher, and his daughter. When little girl Launcher's remains had been found, the Kansas City Times reported, "The little girl was probably 8 years of age and had long, sunny hair and some traces of beauty on a countenance that was not yet entirely disfigured by decay. One arm was broken. The breastbone had been driven in. The right knee had been wrenched from its socket and the leg doubled up under the body. Nothing like this sickening series of crimes had ever been recorded in the whole history of the country." The other remains were identified as Henry McKenzie, Ben Brown, W.F. McCrotty, John Geary, and the unidentified remains of one male and one female victim. Johnny Boyle's body was found at the bottom of the well. The searchers also found several dismembered parts of their bodies, but authorities failed to identify which bodies went with the parts. Diggers found 4 other bodies outside of the Bender property line near Drum Creek and a surrounding prairie, but never identified those remains. The result of the Benders murdering these people came to a monetary sum valued at only $4,600, which included 2 teams of horses and wagons, a pony, and a saddle. Authorities surmised that because some of the travelers carried very little, if any, cash, the Benders slaughtered them for the sheer thrill of the kill. When tracking the Benders and the route they took to elude justice, search parties followed wagon trails to a small town named Thayer, 12 miles north of their homestead. At that point, they purchased 4 train tickets to head in the direction of the town of Humboldt. Several days after that, the Benders' horses and wagon were located a short distance away, with the horses near starvation. After the Benders' spree became public, several people came forward who claimed to have survived after visiting the Bender cabin. One man, William Pickering, refused to sit where John Sr. and Jr. awaited to strike the unsuspecting visitor. Pickering stated that Katie then threatened him with a knife and he escaped any harm in a hurry. A Catholic priest visited the cabin and then quickly left when he spotted one of the Bender men trying to hide a hammer in the priest's presence. At Humboldt, the Benders split up, with John Jr. and Katie heading toward an outlaw colony deep into Texas, and John Sr. and Elmira heading north toward Kansas City. Vigilantes and law enforcement alike made it their primary mission to capture the Benders, but only rumors of justice seekers capturing the Benders and killing them surfaced. At one time, Ma and Katie Bender had been captured, but this proved false as the women were not identified as the murderous mother and daughter. To this day, no one has information as to where the bloody Benders escaped to at the time. Therefore, the Benders denied justice its day, and the whereabouts of the bloodthirsty murderers remains a mystery.
This has been A Moment in Crime. If you've enjoyed this presentation or any other presentation on this channel, please hit like, subscribe, and hit the bell in order to receive notifications on any further offerings on this channel.